More than 2 million Americans are in jails or prisons in the United States. American Prison by investigative journalist Shane Bauer documents his time working as a prison guard and illustrates how prisoners are treated. Bauer is an award-winning journalist. He went undercover in 2016 to investigate America's right-wing paramilitary movement and was held hostage in Iran from 2009 to 2011. He joins us now. Shane, thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking to us about your book. So let's just start with what happened here. You went undercover into a private prison.
Right.
What did you see? What did you learn?
Well, first I just applied on the website, corporate website for the company, filled out my application, used my real name, and within a couple weeks I got hired, $9 an hour job working as a prison guard in a medium security prison in Louisiana. And I spent 4 months there. It was a very intense job. I went through a month of training. I saw a lot of the ways that the company kind of cuts corners, to save money. One way was the low pay for guards. The prison was very understaffed. There'd be about 25 guards for 1,500 inmates. I met a man who had lost his legs to gangrene after 4 months of complaining to the infirmary about his intense pain and asking to go to the hospital. But the thing is, if the company sends somebody out, they have to pay for it. So they were very reluctant to kind of provide the kind of basic levels of care. And the prison was more violent than other prisons in Louisiana as well, probably because of the low staffing rates.
Do we have some sense of how many, what percentage of the overall inmate population is in private prisons, privately run prisons, versus state or federal correctional facilities?
It's about 8%, and with immigrant detention, about 2/3 of the population of detainees are in detention centers run by private prison companies.
So with immigrant detention, it's a much higher percentage, but 8% nationally are in these private facilities. You mentioned costs and how that can affect the way inmates are treated in the private prisons, focusing on that for a moment. What is the structure in terms of the people that run the prisons? They get an amount of money per inmate from the state? How does it work?
Yeah, they get a per diem rate per inmate. In the prison I was in, it was $34. In California, it can be as much as $80. The contract of the company has a clause that guarantees it 96% occupancy. So the state has to give them inmates, or if it doesn't, it has to pay, as though there were 96% of the inmates there.
And what was your impression of the guards that you were dealing with, that you were a colleague with, obviously, their professionalism, the way that they felt, the way that they treated the inmates?
I mean, most of the guards were just kind of poor people from the town. They were desperate for work. There were a bunch of kids out of high school. There were a lot of single moms that, just need a job to get health insurance for their kids. Most of the people I went through training, I wouldn't say had some kind of sadistic motive to work there. They just needed a job, and generally, I think, wanted to be kind of humane and be good people. But once you get on the job, and speaking for myself, I saw myself change quite a bit. There's so much pressure on you. You're in a unit with 350 prisoners with one other officer on the floor, and it's impossible to do all of your duties. And the prisoners are all frustrated because their classes are getting cut all the time. They're not getting out for recreation because there's not enough staff to run the prison. So you're in this kind of cauldron of just frustration and anger. And I noticed myself becoming much more authoritarian in that environment.
Did you witness violence? Was that a constant threat in this particular prison?
Yeah, I saw inmates stab each other. One of the interesting things that I found was, while I was there, I noted every time there was a stabbing. And after I left, I did a public records request with the Department of Corrections and asked them how many stabbings there had been. And the number they gave me for the entire year was lower than the number that actually occurred in the 4 months I was there. So the company seemed to not have been reporting the levels of violence. So this is one of the reasons that I thought it was so important to go undercover, because even if you can get access to these records, which is very difficult, you still don't know, if they're accurate, because the company is essentially cooking the books.
Are facilities run by, again, state or federal government generally better in terms of the treatment of inmates? I mean, I know we're talking about 50 states, tons of facilities, but are there some private prisons that, from your research, are outliers that actually are more efficient, better conditions. What can you tell us about how that matches up?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that state prisons are, have excellent conditions by any means. But if you compare generally a prison of the same security level, same size, the private prisons tend to have more violence. They tend to have more lawsuits over health care, and oftentimes more escapes. The prison I was at had an escape. They took the guards out of the towers to save money. And there's also been Department of Justice studies that show that overall private prisons have more violence and less basic services.
How did you document your time there, by the way? Every day, would you just write in a journal, or were you writing on the scene, or how did you keep records?
I would take notes. I also had hidden camera and recording equipment inside, so I was able to record everything. So when I sat down to write, I could actually use the kind of exact words that people use. So a lot of the dialogue in the book is it's verbatim. 95% of the dialogue is verbatim.
And if you were able to speak to the folks in government who actually might be able to do something about this, what would you tell them? What would you want them to know about certainly how this private prison and others like it are being operated right now, and the kind of reforms that you would want to see?
I mean, there have been studies over and over again since the 80s showing that the conditions of these prisons are worse. There are just endless lawsuits. And the fact is that if these private prison companies were regulated that brought them to the point that they're providing at least the same services as public prisons, which are very minimal already, then the whole purpose for them existing would no longer be there. I mean, I think that it's very hard to justify the existence of these companies. Once they're providing the same level of services, they're not going to be saving the state's money, and they're not going to be making money themselves. It's kind of an unworkable system, and that's why at the end of the Obama presidency, he actually announced that the federal government would stop using private prison companies. The stock price of the company dropped by half when he made that announcement. And when Donald Trump was elected, it rose higher than any company in the stock market.
One detail that I believe is in the book is that you were told during training that if you were going to break up a fight among inmates, which people think of as prison guards, that's a primary mission, is to prevent violence between the inmates. You were doing so at your own risk?
Yeah, that was a common theme in training. It was almost like they were teaching us about protecting the company's liability. So my second day of training, the instructor asked us, what would you do if you saw two inmates fighting? And, people said, break it up. And he said, what your job is to tell them to stop fighting, and that's it. He said, don't get in the middle of them. He said, we're not going to pay you that much. And I remember exactly what he said. He said, if these fools want to cut each other, happy cutting. Because if we get in the middle and we get hurt, then that is another...
So it's all just thought of in terms of financial liability across the board.
Yeah.
And I assume that's also true not just of healthcare, but of food, of the sanitary conditions, of the actual lodging or housing of the inmates.
And we were actually told in training that part of our job is to deliver value to the shareholders.
So you were a part of the profit motive then,
Yeah.
therefore, as prison guards.
Yeah.
Your first priority was not even for the safety of all in the facility, it was actually to drive profit. This is astonishing. Do you think that there's any desire or any possibility of getting something from Congress to change the whole notion? I think part of the problem here is that people don't even know that this exists. I mean, I think if you were to ask most Americans, are there private prisons, they would say no.
Yeah.
Has this been around for a long time, and is there any will to change the basis for this?
Well, like I said, it was reversed under the Obama administration. It was ended. And then
so so there were no private prisons?
No, the Obama Justice Department said that they would not renew their contracts for private prison companies on the federal level. And then shortly after President Trump was inaugurated,
but
he
what
reversed
about
the
the state level, though? I mean, there's a lot of these that are state facilities, I assume. States
right.
are the
Most
ones
of them
trying to save money. They're mostly state facilities.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
So it's still a state-by-state issue. There are some states that don't have them, but they generally are still pretty strong in the places they do exist.
Where do you have the most of them, by the way? Is it Louisiana?
The South generally. I'm not sure which state has the most exactly.
How big a business is this?
This company is...
altogether, or this company?
Yeah, altogether it's about $4 billion business.
And this company specifically?
1.8.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's a big.
And
piece of
this system, it came from the South. The guy who founded this company, Terrell Don Hutto, started his career in Texas running a prison plantation. It was the size of Manhattan, where inmates were forced to pick cotton. He lived on the plantation. He had a houseboy that would serve him and his family. It was a life that was very reminiscent of slavery, and that was the norm of prisons in the South up until about the 1970s, that prisoners would be forced to labor on plantations.
Well, this is really important work, and I know you took some personal risk and obviously discomfort to do it. I think a lot more people should know about this, and we're going to try to do our part to make more people know about this. The book is American Prison. Shane Bauer is the author. Shane, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Appreciate you talking about it. We'll have more Rising coming up. Stay with us.